everybody. Thanks for joining, and welcome to this Lewis webinar, 7 Ways to Effectively Analyze Data and Evolve Campaigns. I'm Ian Lipner, and I'm about to start the program today, but before we get going, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping points. During our panel discussion, all the attendees will be on mute, so you don't need to worry about background noise, but please feel free to participate by asking some questions in the chat box on the bottom right of the interface. Happy to answer those. We'll do our best to incorporate some facts that will help during our main presentation, but also happy to address those in a Q&A session right after the main program. The webinar will be recorded and will be publicly available for replay. So if you get a client call, no big deal, come on back and catch the replay. And finally, we'll send you that link after the webinar is completed so you can share it with your colleagues, or if you really love hearing our voices, you can listen to it all over again. So if you're on Twitter, feel free to join in the conversation live throughout our discussion today with the hashtag. Use hashtag LewisInsights or hashtag AMEC, that's A-M-E-C-M-M. So A-M-E-C-M-M, as it is AMEC Measurement Month, and we're proud to be closing that out with one of the last events of the month. So before we go any further, I want to introduce myself as well as our panelists. My name's Ian Lipner. I've been talking for 45 seconds straight, and I'm about to stop. I'm Senior Vice President at Lewis PR. I've been one of the people who has really emphasized metrics for us for almost 6 or 7 years now, and luckily I've been joined by more capable hands, including Matt Robbins, our Director of Insight and Research.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I lead our Insight and Research group. We focus not only of conducting specific primary and secondary research for media and for clients, but also on the measurement side of things. We look at how the work we do as a PR agency is affecting our clients' outputs, outcomes, and business performance.
My name's James McKinney. I'm an analytics supervisor at Piston Agency, which is a Lewis company that focuses on digital marketing, performance media, creative, and analytics.
Perfect. So we have a lot to cover today, and what we're going to try to do is provide you with a view that is tip-based, and so hopefully that will create a jump-off for some of your questions for later in the program. But we wanted to start off by talking about our first tip, which is getting into a measurement mindset. So one of the things that I've noticed in my career in public relations is a very large shift over time in terms of how we look at campaign success. And when I first joined, I was literally told by big companies to pull out a ruler and measure the length of the copy that was being placed in the articles that we were putting out there. Why? Because they were trying to compare us to the advertising metrics of the day, which focused on column width and column length and things like that. And the irony is that as advertising metrics have improved, well, so have the metrics for PR. But it's only recently that we're starting to see metrics that can help us change the history and the course of our campaigns. And largely, one of the reasons has been among the best practice leaders in this industry, a shift of their mindset. Communicators have actually gotten a little bit more wind at their back over the last few years as we've added technologies like social media and we have new ways to measure our communications activity. We've had to spend less time just justifying our budget per se. And for years, the story was, show me the ROI. What's the return on my investment here? Are you making sure that marketing is paying for itself? And that's great, and people still need to show that. But that's not enough anymore. Now we need to know what is working and what isn't before we get to the end of the quarter, the end of the year, before we start looking at things in terms of performance, right? And this is that second bullet point that I wanted to talk about. When you talk about measurement still in some corners, what people hear is, how am I doing compared to my peers? How am I doing compared to last year? How am I doing compared to last quarter? And those are great things to look at, but they're not going to provide you with as much insight as looking at what are the factors that create success. And so changing the orientation from a top-down, how did we do over the past X amount of time, toward looking at things in the sense of which pieces of content, which concepts that we're peddling out there in the idea marketplace, which opinions are actually gaining traction, and hey, why don't we talk more about those things, right? And so that is where segmentation starts coming in. And we've heard segmentation from, one-to-one marketers going back as far as, well, probably the first year's catalogs, right? Looking at your audiences in different ways. But we also have to look at campaign segmentation in terms of concepts more now, right? So that we can say to ourselves, hey, the content that we create around concept A simply is working better than the completely different content that we created around concept B. And within concept A, the types of content that work the best are X, Y, and Z. We need to create segments not just of our target audiences, but also with our ideas that we're targeting. So a lot of that segmentation opportunity can come as a result of the data that you can get on a demographic level, on a industry, based on your industry knowledge. But sometimes we have to look beyond actions that have already occurred. We're very deep into metrics these days. There's all these platforms for social media that will tell you how many instances of interaction occurred. But we have to remember that those are all reactions to existing ideas, existing events, things that have already occurred. And that the only way to really kind of change how things are going to go in the future is to get a sense of people's intention as well. And the only way that you can get intention, well, one of the only ways you can get intention from people is asking them about their opinion. So we're adding this as a very key part of most of our measurement campaigns, is putting together benchmarks so that we're going out and asking audiences at the beginning, hey, how do you feel about this? And then later, how do you feel about this now? Or what are the top 5 brands in your mind around this subject? And later, how about now? Or what are the 5 attributes you associate with X brand? And later, how about now? You're not going to get that out of sheer clicks, especially as more people click every day. So Matt's going to talk to you a little bit more about kind of how you can even set your goals for all this measurement, and how you can consider these concepts of segmentation and opinion as you try to create a continual improvement process.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And it's very important that at the beginning of each measurement engagement, that you align the communication goals with the overall business goals. So you want to ask yourself things like, what are my organization's overall business goals? What are the organization's public relations efforts, and how do they contribute to those business goals already? What are the organization's primary markets? What are we currently doing on the PR front to measure? You want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what a company is trying to achieve using PR and communications. You want to keep a focus on what's good for the company and not necessarily what's just good for the PR agency or the client PR employees. You also want to help PR campaigns be proactive and not necessarily reactive to either whatever they see in the media or whatever they see within the marketplace. You want to be able to have a plan that aligns with your company's goals from the beginning, so that as new interactions within the media start to come up and rise to the surface, you already have a plan that's going to be adapted to your specific business for those. And also, it's just going to be a better management of your time. You're going to be able to help point to all of your efforts helping push forward a business goal, and not necessarily some of these arbitrary or subjective goals that we typically see when we start to focus on outputs within organizations. And once you start to align those communication goals, it's really going to help you create more of a strategy. It's going to take you out of that mode where you're just counting clips, or you're counting the number of mentions, or you're counting the number of of times that a topic is brought forward. It's going to give you an idea, a tool that's going to help you learn a little bit more, not just about your internal comms team or your agency that you're working with, but also about the market itself. You're going to get to learn a little bit more about the industry, your competitors, and the topics that are rising within the media. So it's important to make sure that as you start to lay out this measurement objective and goals that align with your companies, that they're not just necessarily internal focusing. You want to also look externally and see exactly what you can find from the marketplace.
Yeah, and so what could those business goals be? They for many companies, especially for those of us who work with product and service brands, it might just be increasing sales, right? But it might be more complex than that. It might be a change in market focus. You might be in the world of software going from an on-premise model to a cloud model, which has different kinds of prospects, different companies, and so on and so forth. So creating your business goals isn't just what's going to maximize sales always. It could mean it could be a sentiment change that you're seeking for an airline. It could be completely goals that happen before you get to that ultimate sales metric or that kind of thing. So the objectives that Matt's going to describe in the measurement framework that he's about to lay out kind of start speaking to that, because not every organization's goal is to sell another widget. Yeah,
and as you go through and set those, you really want to kind of keep in mind kind of two phases of measurement. One is that overall program management, or is what we do as the communications function of an organization, helping move forward those business goals, versus that campaign, which are the individual components of that communication program. If you focus more on the program, it's going to give you a little bit more of that holistic view, allow you to tie back to those business goals. If you focus on the campaign, it's going to give you some more of that granularity. It's going to help you create that strategy out of the measurement. It's going to really help show you what works and what doesn't work within the media landscape. And it's really important to make sure that you measure both of those things. And finally, one of those things that's always kind of forgotten in these instances, organizations are blessed with a large amount of data, and it goes to things like the sales data or the website conversion data. But it's really even further than that. Look at client satisfaction surveys, look at own employee surveys, look at information around gated content on your website, any general market research surveys that your organization already does. These are things that are not only going to help you create those meaningful goals, but looking forward, it's going to help you create targets through your strategy that you started creating now that you really understand how your company wants you to tie it all together. And so when you think about these, as you move forward and start to build a measurement framework with your organization, there's a few things that really are there to help you out. Within the industry, the International Association of Measurement and Evaluation Communication, they set out a set of goals called the Barcelona Principles. These really draw upon not only some more traditional market research methodology points, but also some of those digital analytics capabilities that we're going to talk about a little bit further here. But recently they came out and changed up their principles somewhat, making sure that things like the goal setting within your organization are first and foremost and fundamental to what we do as PR and communications professionals. We want to make sure that we focus on the performance aspect and not necessarily just what we generate, which are typically considered outcomes. Things like qualitative and quantitative measures should be used. So no longer is this something where we just count instances within data that's conversion metrics on websites. And really, we adapt these principles and create our own framework that are based on the outputs or what we create in our daily work, the outcomes, which are things that our work have some sort of influence on, and then ultimately the business performance, or what is our impact on those overall business goals. And so to give you an example of each, we further break those down into some subgroups. For outputs, we look at exposure metrics and engagement metrics. Exposure metrics are going to include things that we all know and love, things like media mentions. When we break out those mentions by tiers, when we do things like influencer tracking. Some of the engagement outputs could be social mentions or shares, comments, things like blog or forum mentions or reviews. So the exposure metrics tend to be more things that are just generated by our work, and the engagement tend to be a little bit more of the interactions with our work that we create. When we look at outcomes, we break those two groups up by preference and advocacy. Preference are things like your key message reach, or how you've actually increased your influencer group based on the set of definitions that you create previously. Things that go a little bit more toward the quantitative side, when you do some more brand awareness surveys or your net promoter scores. When we look at advocacy, these are things like those organic endorsements by that influencer group that you've already set up. Or if you see the sentiment within media trends start to point toward a more positive or negative outcome for the organization. And then finally, you'll see at the center of our measurement framework here, we get right back to the business performance or our impact metrics. And these go to some of the things that Ian described earlier, like your shifts in the sales funnel or those interactions with content on website. You can do a further thing like the return on investment from PR engagements. Or if you want to look at more of the external research types that really start to tie into some of those overall brand goals, things like brand value assessments or market share analysis. And it's important as you start to go through and lay out some of these measurement metric areas that you really understand where your data is coming from. Because at the end of the day, if you're doing any of those metrics and looking at things from a overall or a holistic point of view, you really don't get the ability to understand the strategy or the important measure or metrics to those side of the measurements. So you make sure you want to understand the source. What type of data do we want to look at? Do we want to look at broadcast, print, online, social? Do we want to go for the internal data? Do we want to look at qualitative or quantitative studies that we do? Do we want to pull in secondary data from either other external market analysis or from our competitors? We have to understand how we want to look at the data and what that source ultimately is going to be. And it's important that you understand that, because to be able to drill down and create data sets that are important for not only your company, but to make it a measurement against other companies and other competitors, you want to be able to apply a lens to that data. So for instance, if you're looking at online media mentions for a private company compared to a public company, you're going to notice that there's going to be a huge discrepancy there, and that's because those public companies get a lot more mentions just based off of being public and having their financial data and their stock ticker quotes printed on in many other sources. And so you want to be able to understand the source, apply a lens that basically negates that issue so that you get a little bit more of an apples to apples comparison, and you're not just measuring the noise that comes associated with a certain business style.
So this is something that we encounter pretty often. Lewis represents a lot of challenger brands, up and coming companies that are taking down the number one, and the number one is often a public company. And trying to make a apples to apples comparison between a public company that somebody that Mad Money is talking about every day and one that's mostly in the private equity circles is a difficult comparison. So what we do at Lewis is we spend a lot of time with the same tools that you have across the industry to create filters that kind of turn that back into an apples to apples comparison. So remove all those stock mentions, remove a bubble up due to something unrelated. If you have companies that have proper English names, so we have companies, a client called Good Technology. You can imagine that the words good technology come up more often than just in relation to the brand. That's the duty of your agency, is to go through and create strategies for you to scrub that data clean. We're about to talk about in the next portion some of the KPIs across some of your other channels that aren't core media, right? But media is one of the most difficult ones to get good metrics that are clean and don't have a lot of false positives, right? What that comes down to oftentimes is picking a segment or a way to look at the data, like Matt's saying, that evens that terrain out for people, so that you're comparing things that are a result of your communication action.
Yeah, and it's important also to make sure that as you're pulling from these different data sources, that the parameters that you set forth to understand that data are all the same, or else you're not going to be able to make like-minded comparisons. And that even goes for the types of tools that you use. So for instance, if you use one tool to gather print from one source, data source, and then another to gather the same type of print data from another source, those are going to be inherently different because each one of those tools consider that as a part of their IP within the space. It even goes even further. If you use a Google search for one and a Systemos or a Meltwater or a Cision for another, those are going to give you different results. And so it's important from the beginning that you standardize not only those sources of data, not only the parameters of those sources of data, but also the tools or the abilities that you use to gather that data.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of like it doesn't matter if you use centimeters or inches, but you can't switch it up halfway in between. And you can't,
Exactly.
you know, once you've agreed on what that meter stick looks like or yardstick looks like, that's what this step is about. It gets locked in, and now you can start moving into the KPI selection.
Exactly, and probably the most important point, because it's the point that the client and the agency sees the most, is your deliverables. You want to make sure that you give them regular deliverables, that the data is concise and clear, and in many cases it's good to have one set of deliverables for just the internal comms team and the agency, and another set for the boardroom, so that you're making clear definitions of what's important going forward for an overall program view, and then what's important to set strategy at the campaign level. And so now James is going to jump in and talk a little bit more about the KPIs.
Yeah, so when it comes to KPIs, many marketers will start and end with a list of their 3 or 4 most important metrics to gauge success. But that's indicative of a common misconception. In reality, the right KPIs for your measurement strategy are not always the most important numbers. In fact, some of the most unassuming metrics you can think of can actually be incredibly helpful in understanding and explaining the performance of a campaign. A clear example of this is something like bounce rate from your campaign landing page. If there's a functional issue on your site, even the best campaign in the world would not perform well. So it's important to take a full survey of all the metrics available to you and keep an eye on some that may seem fairly unassuming. Our method on the digital analytics front typically entails a tiered measurement structure consisting of primary, secondary, and diagnostic KPIs. Primary KPIs should consist of those metrics that directly influence your campaign objective. If your campaign objective is return on ad spend, ROAS, then your primary KPI could start with revenue as well as spend, conversion rate, or average order value. Secondary KPIs help to explain the fluctuations you see in your primary KPIs. Revenue is commonly impacted by the volume of traffic coming to your website, the quality and engagement level of those visitors, as well as indicators of purchase or registration intent, like micro conversions, newsletter subscriptions, white paper downloads, and so on. Bounce rate is a good example of a diagnostic KPI. It's often that you'll do everything right for the week or the month or the quarter, but performance is still down due to factors outside of your control. Diagnostic KPIs help to explain those fluctuations and prevent the chance of making changes to a healthy campaign because of negative and temporary external factor. The final point here is that different channels and tactics deserve different KPIs. For example, while low funnel retargeting campaign, for instance, is tasked with driving leads or ROAS, higher level prospecting campaigns are instead tasked with driving qualified traffic and interest. The KPIs used to measure the performance of those disparate tactics are clearly very different. On the next slide, tip 5, we're going to look at tools. Now, our definition of tools in this context is pretty broad and includes everything from the media partners you choose to work with all the way down the line to the software you use to measure and report on their performance. While it's already pretty intuitive, it's important to note that decisions you make around the tools you use towards the beginning of a campaign can ultimately have a make it or break it effect on the success of your initiatives. There are several key considerations that go into deciding which measurement platform or platforms you should use, whether that's a web analytics tool like Adobe Omniture or Google Analytics, or a more specialized tool like DoubleClick for paid media campaign measurement. Each tool has pros and cons which are important to consider before you make a decision unique to your needs. Choosing the right reporting tool, whether it's a BI tool like Domo, Tableau, or even Excel, also has a real impact on the performance of your campaigns because the right tool will help you to pull the most valuable insights from those data sources. there are many instances when it's also important to utilize a more specialized reporting tool. If your efforts are targeted towards branding or awareness, you may find the most efficiency long-term if you have access to an enterprise-level attribution platform like Visual IQ or Google Odometry. Depending on your needs and goals, you may also benefit from tools that specialize in audience segmentation, demographic analysis, or different tools that focus on one of many different factors. Ultimately, it's important to choose the best partner for your application. Again, follow the rule of measure twice, cut once when you make these decisions, because the quality of your decisions on day one can determine the eventual success or failure of your campaign. Now I'll pass it back to Matt for tip number 6.
Yeah, thanks, Jam. And you made some good points, and I especially, as more of a measurement of comms and PR focused guy, it always strikes me how similar, especially on the digital side, that we measure a lot of the same things. We're trying to understand how people interact with things and how is our work driving that behavior. And so those are all good points. And this to me is probably the second most important part of a measurement campaign, which is when you go in and you review how you're measuring things. Here at Lewis, if we have a new engagement, we typically like to do the first review after the first quarter. If it's a client that we've worked with for a while, we typically only make it twice yearly or every 6 months. And so there's a few things that you want to go through as you're going through and starting to look at that data. Most importantly, be prepared to make some changes. In a lot of instances with data and research, people like to see those trend lines, and so they're almost scared to change up KPIs almost for the sole purpose that they're going to lose some of that comparison data. Frankly, if that comparison data isn't necessarily helping you shape strategies or shape your campaign, then you shouldn't be looking at it anyway. And so you want to make sure that you change some of those KPIs up. So for instance, if you're working with a company in the cybersecurity space, and we see that a certain keyword for cybersecurity is no longer tracking hard within the media, we should remove that from one of our KPIs if we have been tracking that in the association with that client. You want to make sure that those KPIs ultimately are driving your business goals. So if we see one that, while as an agency or as an organization we perform really well at, like an overall mention, if it actually doesn't help us understand or show that we're driving the change from the business goal aspect of it, then we need to be prepared to change that. You don't want to get lured into some of these what are really more glamour metrics that you see out of your outputs, which could be things like an increase in broadcast mentions or an increase in print and online media, because at the end of the day, they may not necessarily tell us how much we're helping that company move forward on their business goals. And so you want to make sure that you don't see just these high numbers and think that counting the number of backflips that your agency can do is going to really help you or more importantly, impress the boardroom of your organization, because it won't. And then finally, you really want to get creative with the type of measurement you went to. And James alluded to this somewhat. Measurement for each organization is meant to be different. You've probably seen if you try to buy measurement tools or software that help you measure, none of them offer an off-the-shelf capability. You have to change everything to make sure that it fits not only with those business goals, but what your business is ultimately capable of. And so you want to make sure you use that review process to change things up and focus on things that are specifically meant for your organization. If one organization is really good at tracking certain trends within a media-focused set that looks at taglines, but your organization is not necessarily interested in that because you have other business goals, then don't try to do the same thing. This isn't an instance where you want to keep up with the Joneses. You want to make sure that you're only focusing on things that are really going to help drive those business goals. And then really, I think what people miss within measurement, a lot of people think it's a time to set bars and to measure yourself against each other. It's really a time to learn. A really good review session turns quickly into a strategy session. These things should help improve your campaign and your program. You really don't want to see how well the organization does in these metrics, but understand how these metrics help your organization get better at what it does. So you really want to focus on not just what these metrics generate for us, but which ones are the good metrics? Which metrics did we perform poorly on? And if so, why? We want to use these to help us answer the why so that we can help fill in the gaps for the how as we move forward with the campaigns.
And sometimes the metrics can tell business stories before the operational side of the business fully appreciates the impact of some new ideas. We have a client that was selling a capability that could be used for several different purposes. A lot of technology companies will have a core engine, and they can use that technology for different things. Well, what we found as a result of measuring for the purpose of marketing and communications was that there was a rising interest in one of those applications of the technology. And because through best practice we thought, okay, well, look, we're trying to improve our outcomes here, right? We said, well, why don't we do more content? People seem to like this topic. Well, soon it was determined that not only was there more interest in that application of the product, but that it was a more efficient sales cycle for the company than some of the other ways that they could sell the product. And very quickly they realized that was probably one of their most profitable ways to package the product. Now, I'm not going to say that Lewis PR discovered it, but we certainly tried all the ideas that they had, but were willing to kind of review the data and say, this stuff over here, we should do more of this. And I think that's what, if there's anything to take away from this review data portion, it's that's the goal, is figure out what's working. Everybody likes the happy graphs that go up and to the right, but they teach you nothing. They just say, keep doing what you're doing. That isn't a lot of insight. So what Matt's talking about is being willing to shift what your focus is on your KPIs away from performance and toward insight.
Yeah, and I think that's a great summation of it, Ian. It's really a time for you to not only learn about your organization, but this is information that you can pass along. I think a lot of times communications and PR professionals feel like a lot of the work they do becomes unseen by the rest of the organization. This is that moment where you are able to pass along the insights that you've learned, and ultimately there are instances where you can help the business overall and the overall components move forward in a different direction from where they were going. So let's jump over to James for our final tip.
So looking at optimization and really evolution, when your reporting tools excel, the speed of your decision making is only as fast as the analyst tasked with putting your reports together. Reporting automation with tools like Domo or Tableau opens up the pipeline for real-time insights. Measuring and acting daily can, in some cases, improve performance considerably over a weekly or monthly reporting cadence. And this is especially true when it comes to fast-moving campaigns where you stand to benefit from frequent updates and optimizations. Take the time to build the smartest dashboard you can, because looking at the right data is yet another make it or break it step within the process of preparing for a successful initiative. And finally, we can't stress enough how important it is to set budget aside for testing, and don't expect your test to always perform well. Testing new tactics is risky, but it's also one of the best ways to uncover the next big thing. We often set aside as much as 10% of our annual budgets for testing with minimal performance expectations. And while many tests fail, this practice has also been the source of many of our top performing partners and tactics for the next several years. Remember that your team will be more willing to put time and effort into attempting new and sometimes risky opportunities if you don't shun failure. That risk is what drives growth in the long run. And now I'll pass it back to Ian, who's going to cover our bonus tip.
Yeah, that's what everybody's always looking for, is that bonus this time of year. I'm sorry to disappoint you with just mere measurement tips, but I think I'm stealing this tip from Mark Weiner of AMEC, and Mark's been in measurement and research for quite some time, and what he kind of captured in this statement, start simply and simply start, is the sense of panic that some PR folks have, some marketing folks have, that they're behind their peers, that other people know more about this stuff. And I'd say we can go back to some of the points that we were making earlier, right? This isn't about performance. This is about creating continual improvement. And so the best thing that you can do is just get started, right? Just like, if you decide that you're going to take up, running marathons, you got to go out for that first jog, right? And what does that look like? For many organizations, this might be a simple Excel spreadsheet where you're just keeping track of 2 or 3 key performance indicators. Maybe your organization still needs to just track total placements. Maybe that's a step forward to get that data in place, right? Maybe this is the first time that somebody besides the website operator has looked at Google Analytics, but that's a good first step, right? There's a lot of ways that you can start taking a look at the insights there, and you don't have to be some sort of metrics guru to get some simple insights. You're bright enough to look at what Google Analytics can tell you to say, hey, it looks like people are bouncing away from my website when I write about this boring topic, and it looks like they stick when we write about this other one. On the most basic level, you'll start getting some tips and insights for planning, right? And then, you can start working on that culture, creating that measurement culture internally. What you'll probably find, and this is what I found at Lewis maybe almost 10 years ago now, is that there are secret metrics people hiding throughout your organization, people who love the satisfaction of things lining up in a row and keeping track of them and maybe even being able to predict the future as a result. These people might not be in your marketing organization yet. They might not be in your communications organization yet, but they're in your organization. I found my first allies in the finance department. They helped me learn to understand kind of this business intelligence focused approach that we then began to apply toward communications. And those data allies, you'll find just like any other esoteric topic, and once you pop open the lid, people love to talk about the things that they're passionate about. So there are data allies, and what I'm guessing based on the attendees today is that you're way beyond that in your organization, that your marketing organizations are already clued in. Your CMO knows that he has to report to the board just like the CFO. And so, if there's not enough tools in place for you now, the good news is, well, there's a lot of free and low-cost tools that can get you started. Google Analytics has their own Analytics Academy that's completely free that can really get you tuned on that. And Lewis PR, we've actually created our own white paper series about the particular key performance indicators that you would associate with PR. So if you're sitting there going, okay, yeah, but which things am I supposed to measure? There's a whole white paper online for you to take a look at, where you can even skip down to the chart at the very end of each chapter if you want and take a look at what we consider useful measures. But most important, just get that conversation started. You'll find out that you'll learn as much as you thought you knew, and kind of the reverse if you've never jumped in. So that's my bonus tip. But before we kind of end the presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what I see are some key takeaways for today. And I think overall we want to use data not just to prove value, but to improve value. I think that is the thing that we have the benefit of an industry who's now ready to listen. I think 5 or 6 years ago, you had a lot of folks in PR and even in marketing that just wanted to get through their next review, didn't want to raise a lot of questions, just want to show they're doing a good job. That culture is disappearing as those people essentially retire out, and the people that grew up counting analytics from the beginning of their companies, these are the new companies in the world. Second thing is, you're all there for the same reason. Figure out what your business goal is. The days of a siloed marketing department are going away. You're not going to be competing in lanes, and the best organizations don't. You're all looking after that same goal, and you come up with a single concept that works across all your channels. Maybe it looks different in each channel, but it's focused on that business goal. Don't think that metrics are there to show how you've done it in the past. Metrics are there to change things. Even the best campaigns can be improved. Things change over time. The innovative new company that was launching a online conferencing software 10 years ago is not innovative anymore by the same measures. You have to have different metrics for your campaigns as the company's goals change. And then this last one is just kind of one of those silly ones that we throw at you. It's just, that just get started. Tomorrow is the first day that you can say you've been completely analytics filled, and after you get yourself educated, and from then on, everything starts to become easier, and you put together the kind of streets that your analysts will love, putting together that data. So those are kind of the top end takeaways that we want to put out there. We do want to invite some Q&A, and we have a couple questions that have been queued up so far during the presentation. But I wanted to make sure that that we did cover off those top level takeaways. I mentioned our ebook series, From Measurement to Management, and that's again moving away from simply counting and starting to change the approaches based on metrics. And that's where we got those KPIs for you to look at. But I want to go ahead and turn over to the chat function here and take a look at any questions that we might have. Let's see. All right. So here's one. What do you view as success for a measurement program?
Yeah, I'll jump in and answer that one. I think a lot of times people get the idea with measurement or metrics that success is when you, as Ian phrased it, get that graph that goes up and to the right exponentially. That's not always the case. Success is when you use measurement to create strategies that are going to move those business goals. So if you're constantly measuring just the positives, there's a good chance that you're missing the opportunity to create strategies.
Oh, that's a good one. Here's another one. This one's kind of more general, but maybe this is something that James, you kind of talked about bounce rate as one of those that can teach almost everybody a little something. But what are some other basic measurement metrics? I can cover off some PR ones in a sec, but James, what are a couple that everyone should do?
Well, I would say there isn't necessarily one KPI that's going to work all the time for everything, but frequently there are two big categories. If you're a lead gen website, primary KPIs usually focused around registration volume and cost per registration, as well as the secondary KPIs that we were talking about that influence those numbers either directly or indirectly. So overall site traffic is something that's going to apply not only to lead gen sites, but also e-commerce sites as well. If you have an e-commerce site, many of those primary KPIs are just as intuitive. We want to make sure we're driving a profitable ROAS, we're driving revenue, and that also our higher funnel tactics like prospecting or even branding awareness campaigns are bringing qualified traffic to the site, where we can look at engagement ratios and make sure even if somebody isn't making a purchase, they're still interacting with the site and doing high value actions.
Just making sure you can hear me okay. Those are useful metrics. In the PR world, oftentimes we're asked for, okay, what are your basic metrics? And right out the bat, the first ones that we see most often are placement metrics. And we want to graduate from those kind of exposure metrics down toward more of those what we would consider primary KPIs or impact KPIs. But for placements, what we try to say to our clients is, let's not count raw placements. Let's at least come up with a list of like really important ones, so that we may call those tier 1, and maybe we have another tier 2, and we kind of keep track of those. On engagement, we're looking for social interaction, social media interaction based on the piece of content that's placed. So if you go to the New York Times, they'll show you how many times the article's been tweeted. They'll show you how many times it's been shared on LinkedIn, or they might mention if it's one of the top 5 emailed articles. We consider those good measures of engagement. So we're not counting on Twitter. We're counting, we're looking at those websites and looking at that content piece and seeing how many times it's been pinged back to, so that it's really still a media-focused metric, not a social media-focused metric. But it does show that people are pushing your content around, right? Other engagement metrics might be when people blog about a topic that you've put out there, so on and so forth. Within the preference area, this is one where we're seeing share of voice being used more often. So how does that apply to preference? Well, when you talk about, for example, in the most general marketing sense, what does preference mean? It means that they prefer your product over the next person's product. So that that might be Toyota versus Honda versus so on and so forth. In the universe of ideas, so to speak, where we're pitching media, do they prefer our opinion, our message over that of our competitors? So we might measure how often we're quoted on a particular topic, right? What's our share of voice compared to 3 or 4 other competitors around a particular topic? Again, we're not trying to measure the whole ocean of opinion, but looking at the opinion confined to those key competitors, right? For other metrics like advocacy, Matt touched on that earlier. It might be on organic mentions by a key influencer. If all of a sudden Robert Scoble starts talking about how great your tech product is, that's a benefit, even if you didn't reach out to Robert and ask him what he thought of it. That might be a form of advocacy. Another KPI might be the percentage of positive reviews you're getting within Amazon for a product, right? It just depends on what that client or product is we're trying to measure. And then finally, we're all trying to get to those impact metrics. For us in PR, it's like how far, you can lead the horse to water, but it's the sales team's job to make them drink kind of thing. Have we brought those people all the way to an action point on the website, whether it's requesting a demo, asking for a download of an RFP, something that indicates this is a qualified potential buyer, or sometimes it isn't about buying, it's about opinion or signing a petition. What's that final action that we can create? And how are we doing against our goals, and how is that correlating against all those other metrics we talked about? All right, so that was a really long answer to that particular question. Are there any other questions that we can answer out there? I got one more that, here's one. What traditional market research methods are best for communications measurement?
That's a good question, because you're starting to see more of those traditional methods, things like online surveys, focus groups, that secondary data aggregation, and especially in the PR world, as we move more toward the outcomes or what was the influence of our work that we created. You're starting to see those more broad polling tactics. The surveys are a great way to get at that, so you get more of that perceptual research. A great tie-in for using that style research is to look at that brand awareness stuff. We list that as one of those outcomes that we suggest that people track. But you see a lot more of that adoption, and it's something that you're going to have to, as an industry, we're going to have to add and layer more to. And so it's going to be something moving forward that we're going to have to increase, and we're going to get better at as an industry. But I think you're really going to see the ramp up of those traditional quant-qual surveys, the focus groups, and things like that secondary data aggregation and the use of outside analysts.
Yeah, one of the quotes that just comes up for me is, if you really want to know how somebody feels about something, you got to ask them. Mm-hmm. And I think the PR world, we're seeing a lot more budget being dedicated to that, rather than the trial and error method. Because even with analytics on their own, to a certain extent, you're putting something out there, and you're systematically using trial and error through A/B testing and so on and so forth. You can be doing those things through focus groups when it comes to ideas and get a little bit of a jump on that. You'll still want to do that same kind of optimization down the line, but getting a sense of what people want is a nice leading indicator to what they will do. So that's a good question to be able to address. Well, we're coming up on a few minutes to the end of the hour here, and we really do appreciate you joining us today, and we want to make sure that you feel you got the most out of the time that you've spent. So, each of us is happy to answer any questions. You can tweet right at us at the addresses you see in front of you now, or you can email us, and it will reach all of us if you email measurement@lewispr.com. As I said, a recorded copy of this webinar will be emailed to you. And I will do one more plug for our ebook series because it really does help. You know, we find that when we open up to those kind of metric pages for our clients, they you know, are very happy to see kind of an organized approach to which key performance indicators to track. So we hope that you'll take a look at that as well. You know, we really do appreciate your time that you spent today. So thank you. We hope to speak with you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.